So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Delta Talk series. My name is Banke Sotomi. I am a senior consultant and executive coach at Delta, and I'm very excited today to be joined by fellow executive coaches and consultants Michael Puchalla and IK Iroche, who I will introduce in just a short moment. Now, in this series, we will be talking about what you can do to create diverse, inclusive, and equitable cultures at work. At Delta, we believe that organizations thrive when each person flourishes, and we pride ourselves on doing evidence based work and offering practical solutions. So, we will discuss topics that are important to you, topics that are based on common themes or challenges are facing our clients, or prevailing trends that impact inclusion strategies, or perhaps even thought leadership that can help you to start thinking and acting differently to make change happen for inclusion in a sustainable way. And so we would also love to hear from you too. What would you like to hear us talk about? What topics or ideas do you struggle with? What would you like some helpful clarification on? And for those of you listening live today, there will be an opportunity to complete a 3-question survey to tell us this. And for everyone else, just email us at info@deltaalphasci.com with any inclusion related questions that you would like us to help you to figure out. So as I mentioned at the beginning, our sessions will be recorded and they will also be shared on social media. So do be sure that you are following us on our social media platforms and so that you can also have access to these replays as well. For our live audience, we will stop recording at the end of our conversations today and we will open up for questions. But however, do feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat at any point. And of course, if there are any questions left unanswered by the end of today, we will ensure that we follow up with an email to address them. Now, as I mentioned at the start, on today's episode, we are joined by Michael Puchalla and IK Iroche, who are both seasoned executive coaches and equity, diversity, and inclusion consultants for Delta. And I would love to get started by asking Michael to please introduce yourself.
Banke, and also good to see you, IK. I was thinking about when how to introduce myself, and that's always a bit of a challenge, because what are the key things that you're going to give people? How do you introducing yourself? I think in this context, just give a bit of some key things, a bit about myself. So I was born in Germany, and then lived about 10 years in the United States, and now I'm in London for the last 2.5 years. And I'm with Delta EY as a consultant and executive coach. My background is in positive psychology and coaching psychology, which just looks at the human potential and how to best leverage it. And this is something quite close to my heart, because this is the way, or often I guides my coaching approach. And as I said, I'm an executive coach, and I'm accredited with the EMCC, which is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council in the UK. And that means that I'm working with an evidence-based approach, and I'm also ensuring to provide the best coaching services to my clients. And the way I'm doing that is to engage in that continuous improvement of my coaching skills. So I think I'm going to leave it at this, Banke.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Michael. Really looking forward to the contributions that you're going to have in today's conversation. So over to you, IK, a brief introduction and tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Banke. Full name's Ikenna Iroche. IK short for Ikenna, Nigerian name. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but I've lived most of my life in the UK. Spent some years at boarding school in Devon, and then studied economics at the London School of Economics. So that's my own academic background. And then spent 22 years as a executive recruiter or headhunter, working for clients in multiple industry sectors over the years, across 4 continents. And I was working with both giant blue chip organizations and tiny startups building from scratch. And the insights I picked up over those years really inform a lot of the work I do as a coach. And in fact, my segue into coaching was initially as a career coach, relying on the headhunting background. I've been working as a freelance coach with Delta Alpha Psi since the summer of 2020. And one of the appeals to me of Delta's approach was the emphasis on the evidence base and the underpinning of psychology. So those who are familiar with the subject of economics, microeconomics focuses on the individuals and why we make the choices we do. So there are significant overlaps there with psychology. So that was a particular appeal for me. I think I'll stop there because I can talk for England and Nigeria. So back to you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for those wonderful introductions. So yeah, let's get started with the conversation. So today is a continuation of our last episode with Dr. Doyin Atewologun, who is the founder and CEO of Delta, along with Amanda Gethin, who is Global Consultant Talent Leader at EY. And in that episode, they both discussed in general what coaching is as a practice, and they explored some of the ways in which coaching is used in the context of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So to summarize some of the key highlights from that episode, they discussed that inclusive coaching is about building equity and providing the same quality of experience to the coachee. They also explored whether coaching can be viewed as a neutral activity. And this was within experiences. And immediate affinity may show up in the coaching relationship and how important it is for coaches to pay attention to that. So in today's episode, we are going to further explore some of those conversations, but really explore the relevance of inclusive coaching in equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So we will first start off with defining what inclusive coaching is. Then secondly, we will share and discuss the recent findings of Delta's research on the coaching work we've done over the last 3 years or so with hundreds of organizations within various sectors such as education and real estate, etc., where we've coached over 2,000 individuals. We will also then discuss some of the dynamics of coaching in relation to where people have different identities, social identities or social positions. So for example, from a different ethnic or gender background. And then we will look into how that might play out in coaching relationships. And then finally, in today's session, we are going to explore maybe the value adds of inclusive coaching in the work of equity and diversity and inclusion. So perhaps to get started, Michael, can you please share for us what is inclusive coaching?
Absolutely. And for those who don't know me or even know me, I do love to give definitions. And I think it comes from my background in psychology, because in psychology, we just like to define things or give definition to things. And personally, I think it provides just clarity on what we are talking about. So coming to the definition of inclusive coaching at Delta, we refer to it as a coaching approach that has at its core the principles of embracing diversity, building equity and facilitating inclusion in the coaching relationship, but also as an outcome of the coaching process in itself. So for me, what that means in practice is that in the coaching relationship involves creating a trusting space where individuals, regardless of their experience and backgrounds, can explore their aspirations and challenges to achieve the goals. That's kind of the main outcome in coaching. But I think what we need to be aware of is that there is a risk. There's a risk that coaching can become just yet another form of upholding systemic disadvantages if we don't pay attention, especially as coaches, on how we coach and how we can bridge that gap. So I think that's an important aspect of inclusive coaching, because it's not just about coaching underrepresented professionals to fit in or to better help them navigate an unfavorable system, or to coach majority status leaders to uphold that system. You know? So I think that's just to keep in mind. So instead, inclusive coaching is focusing on promoting greater equity and inclusion work. So I recognize it's a bit of a lengthy definition, but yeah, I think quite helpful for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, we do appreciate the depth of that definition. And I don't know if IK, you want to add in your own understanding of what inclusive coaching is.
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer that in kind of two parts. First part, talk about what coaching means to me, and I view the role as a coach is very much helping an individual or sometimes groups of individuals articulate their goals and really understand why those goals are important to them, and then work with them to figure out how to roadmap how they're going to achieve those goals and support them in that journey. And so when I bring that to inclusive coaching, the first step is to actually talk about what inclusion actually means in the broader context and for the individual. Broader context, inclusion roughly equates to a sense of belonging. So when there's inclusion, people feel that they belong. But for individuals, that has very specific meanings. So sometimes when I've worked with leaders in organizations, people talk about how it's their children who have inspired their desire to be more inclusive in the way they lead. So it's really helping people figure out what does inclusion mean for me, and then working with them to identify how they become more inclusive, how they start to inculcate more inclusive behaviors in their roles. So that's how I would look at it. What coaching is first, and then what inclusion is, and trying to marry those in supporting people.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you. So, from what's coming out quite clearly at the moment with the definitions you've both provided is that, inclusive coaching is about facilitating that inclusion, both from that coaching relationship angle, but also from the perspective of the outcomes for inclusion too. So very helpful insights there. So let's dig deeper. Let's go into the conversation a little bit more. And let's do that by looking at the recent research that I've mentioned at the beginning. So Delta did a research very recently which was based on our coaching work we've done over the last 3 years across hundreds of organizations, as I mentioned before, in different sectors, education sector, the finance services, the legal services, and quite a real range. And our coaching team have always worked with professionals across multiple diversity dimensions, including disability, sexual orientation, gender, and of course, ethnic identities. And we've coached over 2,000 individuals, whether in a group setting or in one-on-one setting. And so looking at that research, we interviewed our coaches and we also analyzed our internal coaching reports off the back of the coaching sessions that have taken place in our inclusion ecosystem talent programs. And we did that because we wanted to find out what themes frequently come up during these sessions and to better help us to understand the importance of inclusive coaching. Now, Michael, I know that you were part of that research, and so perhaps you can share with us some of the key findings from that, please.
So let me start with a sort of reflection, because what we found was that when you coach individuals, be it majority or minoritized in the context of inclusion and equity work, you're actually quite privileged to hear many themes that people don't often share publicly, because it shows them from their vulnerable side. Maybe they are there's frustration or apprehensiveness, but also there's keenness to succeed in a system that they understand is built unfairly. So our research on coaching in the context of equity inclusion shows how these biased and skewed systems in the workplace have an adverse impact on the individuals operating within it. So let me break it down into the themes for underrepresented professionals and majority status leaders. So what we found when we were looking at the data for underrepresented professionals, there were some common themes, and we have here a selection of them. So let me see. So there's challenges with visibility, building the right network, challenges with the feedback environment, and the feeling of not belonging or the need to fit into the existing work culture. So again, I think for us coaches also work in that space of diversity, inclusion, and equity. It's not something that we are unfamiliar with. It's actually quite a common thing. But it was expressed that these are some key challenges in navigating career opportunities and career progression within the organization. So when we're looking at the data for majority status leaders, we found that many from that group had a low understanding of the awareness or the appreciation of the lived experience of underrepresented professionals within the organization and their related career progression barriers. And then I think when we dug even deeper into the findings, is then for majority status leaders is there was an awareness, when there was an awareness actually of the lived experience or the career progression barriers, then they were not quite sure to how to address it or manage that. And which we often saw the correlation between a fear of getting it wrong and the lower understanding and how to create the psychological safe and inclusive cultures. And again, these are just some of the selected findings, and which will help us to guide our conversation, I think, today. But there will be a publication where we're going to share some more of the findings from our research.
Thanks, Michael. So now let's bring some of that to life. So IK, just listening to some of those themes that have come up with the research, can you share some specific examples of how some of those themes may have surfaced, maybe particularly with underrepresented professionals from your coaching? How have you seen those themes play out within your own coaching work?
Okay, I think you're mute.
Sorry, I muted while I was taking a sip of water. Apologies. Yeah, so Michael made some very interesting points, including talking about visibility. That is a common theme that often comes up with underrepresented individuals, in the sense that when you as a what do you call it, as a very clear minority in an organization, quite often individuals feel a pressure to blend in and leave some of their real selves at home. And by blending in, they sometimes end up feeling invisible. Their voice isn't being heard. So that's a fairly common theme that I wanted to touch on, that Michael mentioned. But also in terms of the work I do regularly, one thing that comes up over and over and over again in the Delta programs we run is situations of suboptimal feedback environments for those from minority backgrounds. And by that, what I mean is, for some reason, they're not getting the quality and the detail and depth of feedback from line managers and others in the organization, or sometimes they're not very receptive to it. So and that also, I know you asked me about underrepresented individuals, but that also plays into the majority leaders, who often find they hold themselves back from giving constructive feedback because of concerns about being judged for, use that, that the R word, racist, or something else. So that's a thing that occurs quite regularly. The other one that Michael briefly touched on was feelings of not belonging. So we often find those from minority backgrounds talk about experiencing the phenomena of imposterism. I think everyone's familiar with the term imposter syndrome, but it's not really a syndrome. So we talk more of the phenomena of imposterism. So that whole self-doubt that perfectionists often struggle with tends to get amplified when you're from an underrepresented minority background, especially in forums where you're the only one from your demographic. So that's something that is a regular theme that's fed back. And then one of my observations, and I think is actually quite critical when we think about people progressing in organizations, is a challenge or a difficulty in making those personal human connections with leaders from majority backgrounds. And whether that's due to cultural differences, whether that is due to race, ethnicity, sexuality, other differences, that is a common theme that, when Michael talked about majority leaders realizing the system, is advantageous to them, that's an example of something that a majority leader never really has to think about, building rapport with people from very similar backgrounds. They went to similar schools, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'll stop there because I could go on for quite a while.
No, I mean, thanks, IK, because I think you do really bring out some interesting thoughts there, because from our work and the research that we have done at Delta, we do know that these challenges that you've just spoken about do often come within the context of an inequitable system, and where for many organizations, they're not aware or even focusing on those organizational barriers. And I often like to quote a colleague of ours at Delta who speaks about, if one has a pipe that is leaking, you don't blame the water, you look to fixing the pipe. And I think what these themes really speak to are highlighting and spotlighting some of those systemic issues within organizations. And perhaps that's, really why we emphasize in our inclusion ecosystem, the work is not just with the talent, it's also ensuring that the organization within itself as the container also looks into being fixed and rectified where barriers are. So thank you for that, IK. Michael, what about you? What themes from the majority status group that have surfaced have you seen in your own coaching work? Perhaps you can share with us as well some specific examples.
Yes, absolutely. I just to say, I love this quote, about looking at the pipe and the water and the system. And let me see if I can incorporate that somehow into my response, and hopefully that will work. So again, one of the themes, where we said earlier, is that lower awareness or understanding of what are the challenges or barriers for underrepresented professionals. And I was working with a sponsor and ally in one of our ecosystem programs, and we were looking at developing diversity fluency. So just quickly for those, and again, I love this definition, so I will provide one to provide that clarity of what diversity fluency is and what we mean with that. And at Delta, diversity fluency is how confident and proficient, people are in understanding, in articulating differences in career outcomes for diverse groups, for example, women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender employees, minority ethnic employees, and disabled employees. So when I then was working that, it shows working with the white male ally, we recognized that for him, there was some this low awareness, the understanding of where are the barriers for underrepresented professionals within this organization. And he was quite high in the organization, a director in the financial sector, and we're working at one-to-one capacity. And, he came to the session with the main challenge he was facing around, how to speak and lead authentically on race and ethnicity culture change within his organization as a white male. And that will be some of the key bits. Because, as you said, the system, and IK, you mentioned that, is provided, can for some individuals, especially belong to the majority group, give you that privilege to not, look at some of the issues or not be exposed to them. So there's an advantage for you. And that is something where, when we were digging into the conversation further, we first came to an understanding for him that there's a certain fear of getting it wrong, because he has not had the lived experience of an exclusive work environment. And we spent some time unpacking that. And I think for all, and IK and Banke as coaches, we kind of know that the goal is to move him to actions and within the coaching space, and that's super important. But also to create that meaningful outcome or create that meaningful action for an individual, we can't necessarily rush through the exploration stage. So that turned out to be quite a valuable stage to be in for this individual, because it was important that he had that space to explore, explore his fear, and then to move into this like action stage for him to put in place a meaningful goal. And when we spent time exploring that, he realized, because of being a white male, his system provided him with disadvantages, as I shared before, like a different experience. But the impact is that it lets him feel out of his depth as a leader to drive that change. And it was quite clear that he wants to, but doesn't know how to necessarily. So what we did was building, this awareness and clarity. And inclusive coaching can provide that. It can provide that space to unpack that without that judgment, and to gain that clarity on that individual barrier. And one of the key things for him was to overcome his fear. And it was related to this fixed mindset of needing to know it all as leaders, or as a leader. And before he can actually engage in driving change, culture change with an organization. So we shifted it to a growth mindset. And that meant for him to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And as an outcome, it was actually quite nice to see that the coaching had an impact on how he would approach it. So he felt more authentic, putting our actions in place that challenged him, and but also felt authentic to him. And one of them was to embrace his discomfort with his team, actually, and to educate himself and getting involved with the networks within his organization, and just to learn more, but then also to step into action to remove some of these systemic barriers.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, that's a very detailed experience that you've spotlighted for us. And so, from what we've discussed so far, it's clear to see that there are indeed different themes that do emerge within these groups. But it's also clear to see how they can come out within coaching as well. And so, that was really interesting in terms of the way you've explained the dynamics there. So let's just do a mini recap for our audience so that they are following along. So far, we have defined what inclusive coaching is. We have just gone through sharing and discussing some of the common themes that arise for underrepresented professionals and also for majority status leaders within the context of coaching in EDI. So what I would like us to do now is to go into a conversation around some of the dynamics of coaching in the context of people with different social identities or social positions. So for example, different ethnicity or different gender identities, where we look at whether having shared lived experiences or not having shared lived experiences actually influences the coaching relationship. Now, for our audience, if you have not listened to part 1 of this series, we do encourage you to listen to it, because in that episode, we discussed 4 different dynamics that can be at play when coaching across difference. And just for the purposes of our conversations today, I will briefly run through that. So the first dynamic is the dynamic of an insider coaching an outsider. And this is where someone from the majority status group is coaching an underrepresented group member. So for example, a white man coaching a Black woman. The second dynamic is the outsider coaching an outsider. And this is where both parties in the coaching relationship belong to the same underrepresented group. So for example, a Black man is coaching another Black man. The third dynamic is the insider coaching an insider. So both parties in this relationship, coaching relationship, they are from the majority status group. So for example, a white man coaching another white man. And then finally, the fourth dynamic is the outsider coaching an insider. And this is where a member from the underrepresented group is coaching someone from the majority status group. So for example, a Black straight female coach is coaching a white straight male. Now, that was a bit of a mouthful, I have to admit, and I do acknowledge that it might seem, somehow of a messy shorthand way of describing different identities, privilege, and even disadvantage. And of course, we do acknowledge that we all have different intersectionalities, whether it be race or gender, class, religion, sexual orientation, so much. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's just really a simplified framework so that we can get some ideas flowing with this. And it's to speak to the point about, to what degree, the degree to which we pay attention to whether power and social dynamics are at play in coaching, and then also to kind of examine to what extent our experiences, our backgrounds, knowledge, values, ideas, and perhaps even assumptions also influences the way in which we coach. Now, Michael, back to you concerning the research. Did our research show anything in this context?
Yes, it did, Banke. And it was actually quite something surprising for us when we were looking at the data. We were not expecting this to find. And let me use you the terminology of the insider-outsider of the for dynamics. So again, so when there is an alignment, so what the data showed, when there is an alignment in the experiences and identities, such as an insider coach is an insider, what you have mentioned, for example, two white men in a coaching relationship, or an outsider coach is an outsider, for example, two Black men. So at the beginning of the coaching relationship, there's a greater comfort level that helps to build that rapport because of the similarities and commonalities, again, such as the lived experience, maybe shared gender, race and ethnicity, or that age or seniority level even. And when we were looking in contrast to that, we found when there aren't immediate shared lived experiences, when an insider coaches an outsider or an outsider coaches an insider, again, for example, a coaching relationship between an older white man and a younger Asian woman, we found that at the beginning of the coaching relationship, there can be a greater discomfort level, even be some self-doubt, of questioning yourself, of being a good fit, because of the differences. And we saw that can be at the beginning of the coaching relationship hinder to build that rapport.
Thank you very much. And so, IK, that's the research. Perhaps you can bring some light to that and share how that research and resonates with you in your own coaching experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a degree of resonance. In terms of coaching, a coach and a coachee having shared lived experience, that definitely has its benefits, especially very early on in the relationship. Very early on in a relationship, because coaching is such a personal thing, and it's also a very trust-based thing. So if you as a coachee meet a coach who you feel, without any words being spoken, without any information being shared, this person gets me because they've lived a similar life to me, or they've been exposed to similar biases or whatever challenges, that can help smooth the transition into working together. But beyond that initial establishing of rapport, or accelerating the establishment of rapport, I think that's to a large extent where the advantage ends, because as a good coach, your role really is to help the individual bring this information out. So our questioning skills, our abilities to listen, are vitally important. And to some extent, there's even a danger that if you rely on lived experience as a coaching tool, your biases can adversely impact your coachee. I as a Black male professionally, found my my minority status to be a career advantage. But do I then presume that with every Black or brown person I work with? Is that helping them? If I presume, well, I did it, so surely you can as well. No. In fact, and also another example that I can think of, probably a very good one, a close friend of mine who is a managing director at a large investment bank. He got promoted about 2 years ago. So we caught up last year. He doesn't live in the UK, so we don't see that as often as we used to. We caught up last year, and he was talking to me about how on his journey to making MD, the bank provided him with a coach. And the coach took what I would consider a traditional coaching approach and really working with him to try and bring the answers out of him in terms of how he was going to, improve, make transition. And that just did not work for him. That's not how his mind works. That's not how he's wired. And he asked for a new coach. And they provided him a coach who had previously been an MD in the same bank. My friend's a Black male. This new coach was a white female. But he got everything he wanted from that relationship because the lived experience that he was interested in, that was most valuable to him, was that journey of going from director to managing director in an institution like his own. So that's an example where, so lived experience is useful, but we need to be careful not to trap ourselves into boxes of, only Black women can coach Black women, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, that really is valid. And I'm conscious of time, Michael. I don't know whether you want to have anything to add to that. Is there anything that you would add from your own perspective?
Yeah, I would love to add something. I want to pick up something on the assumptions what IK mentioned, which kind of really stood out for me as a coach, to provide the best experience and to not tap into that. And I think when I first, I remember back when I first was coaching, or started coaching in the diversity and inclusion space, I can recall the first session and had some, great self-doubt actually, or worries about my identity. Being a white man, coaching clients belong to the underrepresented group in their career challenges. Some of my thoughts or concerns were actually, can I offer them? What can I offer them? Will they trust me because of my identity? What if I say something insensitive? And this caused me a quite discomfort at first when I was coaching in that space. But and I think that is something what IK then said is, what do we do? What do we do as coaches in that space? There's something that we need to manage in order to provide, an experience for all of our coaches to get the best out of it. And for me, I do a couple of different things. I do supervision that helps me a lot to manage that. But I also can see that we all not always have the time to tap into that. So I use a very simple model coming from a transactional analysis called the OK Carroll, which was developed by Franklin Ernest. And it's a simple one which helps me to identify the coach's discomfort in a coaching relationship. So in practice, it helps me to just observe where do I fall in on my discomfort level, and I can then decide, to make adjustments. But I also can recognize to see if my coachee or the coachee in this context has some discomfort. I'm looking out for the cues and behavior, and we're looking in between, reading between the lines. And again, I'm looking at what's the impact of that. Is there an impact to the coaching relationship? And, can we bring this into the space and talk about it? And often we do see that, the larger dynamics from the larger system will play out in the smaller system. So meaning in the coaching relationship, we can manage it. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. I can definitely relate to some aspects of that. Coaching someone outside of your own group can cause discomfort. And I can also relate to when I've coached with individuals from who share the same characteristics of me, and how it's been much easier to build that rapport. So, I'm conscious of time. So taking this home now, sort of landing the conversation we've had so far. Michael and IK, perhaps you can share from your perspective what you think the value add of inclusive coaching is for organizations, and what are some of those benefits you would say that inclusive coaching has for transforming workplaces into more inclusive spaces?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, please go.
Okay. I think so. First of all, in terms of why inclusion is important, it's basically by having inclusion, or by having an inclusive culture, individuals feel more able to bring their real selves, which means the organization benefits from multiple points of view, multiple perspectives, which I think is critical in quality decision making. So what can inclusive coaching do to support this? I think first and foremost, what we do as coaches, especially in the sort of programs Delta runs, is we create a platform to have the conversations that haven't been had, the difficult conversations. And when we're able to talk to, and more importantly, listen to each other, then we're better able to make the changes. Wearing my economist hat, I often talk about how policymaking, whether that's in the government sector or in the private sector, policies are so regularly made by people high up who are not connected to those affected by their policies, which then leads to poor policy results, poor outcomes. And what we do with inclusive coaching is we're changing that balance. We're connecting the leaders to those that are affected by the decisions they make, the processes in the organization. So that's, again, you did say time, so let me stop because I'm rabbiting on. You have a go.
Thank you, IK. No, very interesting. Michael, really quickly, what would you say the value add of inclusive coaching is?
Yes, and I see there a couple of things, the two things, and let me get them across in a short way. And I think I'm going to take this from the perspective when working with majority status sponsors and allies. So on one hand, coaching can support raising awareness, so developing also leadership abilities, and as I said, increasing that awareness and understanding of diversity and inclusion issues. Again, we can think about unpacking unconscious bias or privileges, or looking at the systemic barriers. But on the other hand, and that's where I personally see the real value add of coaching, it provides an individual with that personalized and tailored approach to learning and development. And I see this often within their coaching work, and I do where they identify and leverage their strengths, or gain insights and perspectives to overcome their personal challenges, and to develop the skills to create psychological safe and inclusive cultures within the organization. That's the value add for me, inclusive coaching.
Yeah, no, thank you, both of you. And just to kind of bring this really home now, we want to leave our listeners with some practical tips, especially in terms of how inclusive coaching is valuable, as you've mentioned. So IK, over to you in terms of, what will you provide as practical tips for our listeners in terms of using inclusive coaching for greater sustainable inclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Banke. First thing I'll say is to recognize that coaching is a very personal thing. So for the individual, it is very important to find a coach that you are comfortable with. And that's how you get the most out of the relationship. But then also thinking about organizations, as I said a few minutes ago, you can use inclusive coaching to create those trusting spaces to have those difficult conversations. And that can be very, very valuable. Also, organizations should consider providing access to coaching as a valuable learning and development tool for positive culture, because it is proven to be possibly the most effective of the tools out there right now for doing this. I'll let Michael jump in.
Yeah, Michael.
Again, I think this the personalized development tool where we can coaching, where we see coaching, and especially for majority status leaders, we hear this often. Having the time and space, to show this, to explore some of these barriers. So vulnerabilities, again, is a powerful thing, especially for leaders. And this is one of the things where I feel like coaching can come in. from a coaching perspective or from a coach perspective is to develop a practice of self-reflection to become aware of your coaching blind spots. And, again, being mindful that people have different identities or status is important in a coaching relationship. It just, it helps to work consciously in that space.
Thank you for those tips. And of course, just to mention to our listeners today, we do have more practical tips on the power of inclusive coaching. And we have a helpful framework on our website that you can go to for further guidance. And I believe that link will be posted in the chat box. So we definitely encourage you to do that. But of course, if you do have needs for inclusive coaching at your organization, please do send us an inquiry. We would definitely love to connect with you. Again, our email address is info@delta-alpha-sign.com. I mean, we can go on for so long on this topic. We can, it's obviously a really, really juicy topic that we've thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation about, but we do have to wrap up now. And I just want to say thank you, Michael and IK, for your time and your insights in today's session. And to all our listeners who have tuned in today, and those of you who will be watching the replay, thank you so much. We would love to have your thoughts and your feedback on today's episode. And so remember that we are also keen to hear from you. So if you have any other topics that you would like us to talk about, or any challenges you would like us to help you out with, please do let us know, reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to connect. Now, again, for those who are listening live, there will be an opportunity for you to fill out a survey to answer this question. And for anyone who's watching the replay, you can just email us at the email I've mentioned earlier. Just before we end for questions, Q&A, just a spotlight that we will be having our next Delta Talks episode on the 4th of August with Dr. Doyin Atewologun and our very own Michael Puchalla, who will be discussing psychological safety. And that definitely promises to be another insightful session. So do please stay tuned for that. Now, for our live audience, we will stop the recording now and open up for questions. So if we can stop that recording and open up for questions, thank you.